You know, I never really liked 2D platformers.
Look, I understand the appeal of getting skillful in technical 2D challenges. It's fun to watch a speedrun of a 2D platformer and witness the way a player perfectly times certain maneuvers. But when I play these games on my own, I find myself losing motivation to keep going for one reason or another. If a 2D platformer is too easy, I get bored from just holding right and pressing jump. If it's too hard, I get frustrated by its punishing design and never want to pick it up again. They rarely have a decent story to keep me engaged, and there's hardly ever any kind of progression system to keep my moveset fresh and interesting.
And yet, despite all my issues, I still managed to pick up this infuriating game. Twice.
Yes, some amazing creators out there have put together wonderful levels that rely less on the player's platforming ability, but it still wasn't enough to make me jump ship from my intense love of JRPGs.
After explaining all this, you may be wondering how I can make a whole video on a tough-as-nails indie platformer. Why the hell do I like Celeste? Let's talk about it. Hey loves, and welcome to my cluttered mess of good feels and fulfilling struggles. Today, I want to talk about this little gem.
Celeste was released by the indie studio Matt Makes Games. It was originally conceptualized as a small adventure created for the fantasy console Pico 8. Matt Thorson and Noel Berry designed the game during a 4-day game jam event in 2015. It contains the very basics of what you would find in Celeste's gameplay, and is still available online to play for free. Later on, Matt felt inspired to use concepts from Celeste and make a full-fledged game, put together a small team for this project, and eventually, Celeste was released in early 2018 to critical acclaim.
I love this game. Like, a lot. And by all accounts, I shouldn't.
Celeste is ruthlessly difficult, and will make sure you die hundreds, if not thousands of times. But it only takes an hour or two to beat if you know what you're doing.
That's all I thought it was going to be going into it. I thought it would be another indie platformer that I'll get frustrated with and I just will enjoy the heck out of. However, I was wrong. And the best place to start explaining why is at the beginning.
The game begins assuming the role of Madeline as she strolls up to the base of a mountain. You hear a soft, tranquil piano melody as you make small jumps and modest climbs. It's a very calming trek up until you reach a small cabin. Here, we are introduced to Granny, an old woman who's been living on the mountain for several years and warns Madeline about the dangers of the mountain. Granny has next to no confidence that Madeline can handle the mountain, and Madeline is immediately annoyed. Granny continues to laugh as Madeline carries on.
The player might assume that we just go back to simple platforming, but in one short moment, Celeste introduces its first key point. This is an incredible introduction to events that have yet to unfold. It tells you plain and simple that you're going to be facing off Celeste Mountain itself, and it will be one of the hardest tests of skill and mental endurance you've ever experienced. But it wants you to tackle what lies ahead. It wants to let you know that you can do this. You're capable. You may not think you're much right now, but just wait until you see what lies ahead. After all, you just escaped a collapsing bridge unscathed. That's pretty amazing, don't you think?
The first chapter takes place in an area known as the Forsaken City, a strange collection of abandoned buildings and forgotten advertisements of unknown origin. Although it's only the beginning, Celeste wastes no time to decide that the best training wheels are no training wheels.
And what I mean by that is...
Before, all you had to deal with was pits and the occasional crushy block, but now you also have to deal with walls lined with spikes and mechanized platforms that move when you make contact. It's hard to learn these sections, but it's doable. Every death hurts a bit, yeah, but it's over in an instant. You're back on your feet in no time at all. The game wants you to keep going, letting its previous message echo in your mind.
As you explore this forsaken city, you eventually start to feel that familiar gamey feel. It's fun, lighthearted, challenging, and engaging. And eventually, it leads you to a fellow climber.
This guy is Theo, and oh my god, I love Theo. He's filled to the brim with stories, quips, and overall good vibes. He comes off as such a wholesome guy just wanting to find some adventure and meet new people. You can talk with him for as long or as little as you like, but if you engage in conversation for a while, you'll find out about his passion for photography and his hopes to share his adventures with the world around him on his social media.
That's one of the charming things I notice about Celeste. You can engage in as much or as little story as your little heart desires. Of course, me being one to search out as many reasons to cry as possible, I was invested in everything Theo had to say before moving on.
When Madeline finally reaches the top of the Forsaken City, she finds a strangely large sign that reads Celeste Mountain Memorial, dedicated to those who perish on the climb.
Oh, you mean me?
And with that, she settles down by a campfire to take a nap, thus ending the chapter. We begin Chapter 2 in the same location as the end of the first chapter, but it's not quite the same. The background is mystical, the music is mysterious, the whole area seems almost dreamlike. It's a strange area to navigate. There's tons of winding paths and these weird space blocks that keep getting in the way. It's a far cry from the gamey platforming the player was just experiencing. There aren't any pits, there's hardly any spikes, and there's nothing to do but explore.
I can really only describe this area as unconventional.
It feels cluttered and messy, and the path forward is tucked away in a corner. But once the player finds their way, suddenly, all the weird space blocks change into a fuller color, as if Madeline's reflection breaking free opened the way forward. The area becomes a bit more linear. There's an obvious path forward. Anxious to figure out what the heck is up with Madeline's reflection, the player will press on, dashing through space blocks winding each and every direction, until eventually, we're introduced to part of Madeline.
No, I am not going to use her official name, and I am not sorry.
Part of her is condescending, rude, and narrow-minded in convincing Madeline to quit her climb. Madeline obviously refuses.
The mountain is different. It's needed. It's what she needs to get herself back together. It has to be climbed.
Regardless, the two fail to come to a resolution. And so, she runs away from her. A chase begins. Part of Madeline remains hot on her tail, copying her exact movements, like trying to run from a shadow. She keeps running, dashing, anything to get away from this part of her, but it doesn't stop, it just grows worse. Part of her multiplies, becoming a larger threat. The terrain becomes more destructive and capable of killing you. The chase continues until Madeline comes across an internet station with a ringing payphone. She answers it to hear an unnamed character wondering what Madeline is up to. The conversation slowly becomes more sinister as this character acts increasingly more and more smug, and Madeline drops it in frustration. And then, it's over. Madeline wakes up. She walks through the same area again, but it's not the same. The space blocks are gone, the sky is normal, and everything seems to be real again. It was just a dream. At the end of the pathway, she finds the payphone again and decides to use it. She calls her mom in her panic state, hoping for any kind of comfort after what had just transpired.
The entirety of Chapter 2, I believe, holds the second key point in Celeste. That being, if you want to climb this mountain, you're going to have to confront yourself. Acknowledge what's hidden deep within you and figure out how to deal with it. It's a chilling thought attempting to sort yourself out, acknowledge the messy bits, and try to move forward. But it's necessary. It's what the mountain demands. It can feel really difficult to keep going, but just remember the game's words. You can do this.
I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of every chapter like I've done with the first two, but I wanted to highlight them for how they make an impression. The first chapter sets you up to think Celeste is just going to be a chill game with mysterious elements that are fun to look into and think about, but don't really add anything to the overarching narrative. It's fun to learn the dash mechanic and see what it's capable of. It's fun to clear a screen after struggling for a while. It's fun to see if you're good enough to collect strawberries littered around the level behind more challenging screens. And most importantly, it's fun to be with Theo.
God, I love Theo.
But then, you take a break, get some sleep, and it's no longer just a fun climb. Chapter 2 is a story of Madeline beginning to examine her own mind. In her time of self-doubt, she wants to dream about why she's here, what she wants to accomplish, and instead, she realizes how cluttered her mind is. It's full of random, pointless paths that don't lead anywhere, and all that lies to be discovered is her own reflection, a part of her she's ignored, silenced, tried to remove, but to no avail. And now, the mountain is forcing her to confront this part of her.
This tone continues through the next few chapters as Madeline tries to distract herself on the continued climb.
At the beginning of Chapter 3, Madeline wanders into the Celestial Resort, a hotel located by the cliff face of the mountain. It appears to be completely abandoned, only filled with evil dust bunnies that are ridiculous to avoid sometimes. Well, it's abandoned except for one special character. Meet Mr. Oshiro, the only person in charge of this entire resort. He's desperate to find guests willing to spend a night and goes to every length imaginable to try to please Madeline. He finds himself in a cluttered mess and feels as though his situation is hopeless.
Sound familiar?
Madeline decides to help Oshiro clean up the place. And by cleaning up the place, I mean finding void cabinets that suck the entirety of a given material into them.
Gee, that's awfully convenient. I wish I had something like that to clean up my messes.
It becomes more and more obvious the further you progress in Chapter 3 that Mr. Oshiro seems off. He's restless, scared, struggling, not sure what to do with himself. He sees Madeline as his only hope for fulfillment. He believes that if he can just give a guest a satisfying experience, he'll be happy again. And what does Madeline do in return? On the surface, she politely declines Oshiro's offers and asks now and then about a route behind the resort. But on the inside, part of her lashes out at Oshiro. Part of her exclaims that Madeline only wants to help Oshiro to feed her ego. She calls her pathetic and passes that on to Oshiro as well. He begins to feel unwanted, betrayed, dismissed, and attacked. Madeline insulted a part of herself before, and now she has insulted an innocent soul just trying to find happiness.
So, what does she do? The only thing she feels like she can do. Run.
Chapter 4 has a very ominous tone. The music is subtle, the sky is yellow like an early morning. The platforming is littered with clouds and blue bubbles which launch you upwards. And strangest of all, Granny is here. The conversation between Madeline and Granny is really telling when you apply it to recent events.
You might say that Chapter 4 is the first chapter to not introduce a new character, but I don't think that's true. If Granny is to be believed, Celeste Mountain itself is a character.
The power of the mountain forces those climbing it to deal with what they are normally able to suppress. It forces them to come face to face with their own reality and let those climbers decide for themselves what to do with it. The mountain notices Madeline's actions, the way she first treated part of herself and later treated Mr. Oshiro. The Golden Ridge feels a lot like atonement for Madeline's harsh treatment. This chapter is the most platform-heavy chapter since Chapter 1, and the mountain implements effects to make Madeline decide if she truly has the will to keep going. Heavy winds blow against her in nearly every screen, which only becomes heavier as the chapter continues. Snowballs charge at you from ahead, following your movements and stopping you at all costs. Cloud platforms slowly become more unforgiving, no longer allowing you to bounce on them multiple times. It's a lot to handle, it's intense, it's frustrating even. But once you reach the last few screens, the mountain works with you instead of against you. The wind changes direction, blowing from behind instead of ahead. The boost of wind propels you forward, allowing the final jumps to flow in a satisfying rhythm.
And what lies at the end of this test from the mountain? Well, it's what I believe to be the second most impactful scene in the game, the gondola scene.
Madeline comes across a gondola, and Theo manages to literally drop in at the same time. So, they ride the gondola up together.
As someone who deals with anxiety on a semi-regular basis, Celeste portrays the feeling of panic attacks in a terrifyingly accurate way.
Panic attacks take full control of your body. Your breathing speeds up, your body feels condensed, your senses are heightened, and you're left stuck in this state unless you can manage the strength to calm yourself down.
Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, it doesn't stop. Sometimes, the only thing that could stop the rush of anxiety is a friend to stay calm by your side.
Upon reaching the gondola's destination, Madeline and Theo come across the Mirror Temple. This chapter is perhaps the most ominous of them all. You'll constantly run across platforms that act in accordance with your own dash and open segments that are really easy to get lost in. Platforming itself is relegated to small one-screen challenges, leaving the rest up for exploration. It isn't long into the temple that Madeline discovers Theo behind a wall, stuck wandering in his own space.
This chapter wants to make you feel lost. It wants to make you feel directionless and scared. It wants you to take your time, search, and find your way. It wants you to contemplate the events that have led up to this moment.
Theo is missing, Madeline is alone, and what remains is just herself and empty rooms. However, she's eventually able to make her way to a massive mirror, and it's at this moment that the temple fully reveals the inner demons Madeline tries to hide. The surrounding area turns into a nightmare, and like everything terrifying that's appeared in this game so far, it wouldn't be complete if part of Madeline didn't show up. Madeline is quick to blame the events of everything in the Mirror Temple on part of her, but she isn't having it. She explains that everything going on is a result of the mountain's influence, including the form that she takes. The temple only heightens the mountain's power, giving climbers a terrifying look into their own crooked minds. Madeline almost can't bear it. She begs part of her to get her out before being told she deserves what's happening to her. She struggles to go through rooms infested with monsters. She's near panicking once again, but then she reminds herself. The temple returns to a closer form of its original state, but the monsters remain. Desperate to find Theo, Madeline searches through the temple looking for any trace of his whereabouts. And after searching for a while, they finally meet up. Theo is stuck in a crystal and requires Madeline's help to escape, so the two head forward with even more to conquer.
Madeline now has to face her inner demons while simultaneously bearing the literal burden of another. And yet, even though this is the hardest part of the entire chapter, I can't help but smile at it.
This is the first time Madeline and Theo are actively working together. Sure, Theo doesn't provide much more than travel banter and being able to pass through spikes, but the two of them are fighting for each other. Madeline's mind isn't focused on her own demons anymore. She's focused on saving Theo. And it's because of this shift in focus that Madeline and Theo manage to get closer and closer to an exit. Until finally, they find a giant eye ominously pressuring Theo and staring him down. Theo collides with the eye, and the way opens. Following their dramatic escape, Madeline and Theo sit down for a fireside chat. And as one does when you've just barely escaped from a seemingly life-ending threat, they get pretty real. After Theo remembers about the reality of the temple, Madeline finally talks to him about the part of her that seems to be hunting her down. Theo also opens up and decides to talk about his family, specifically his sister Alex. He remarks on how similar Madeline is to her in her actions, her attitude, and even her reasons for climbing the mountain. That is to say,
Same.
this moment is the first time the player is able to understand what exactly Madeline deals with. She feels stuck, trapped, and focused on mistakes of the past. She can't move on from them, and she hates those parts of herself. She wants nothing more than to just escape her thoughts and accomplish something. But the mountain itself is keeping her from doing that. The player is also able to understand what exactly Theo wants from this mountain. People in his life treat him well, and they're there for him when he needs it, but he feels like he can't figure out what to do with his life. He looks up to his sister, but he puts a lot of pressure on himself to improve. He doesn't feel like he can be there for Alex in the same way. So he asks Madeline for help. He asks what exactly it's like to deal with depression. The conversation ends with Madeline deciding that she wants to get rid of the part of her that's been chasing her. She wants to stop the bullying and make sure she's gone once and for all.
God, I love Theo.
The night falls, and by the wings of the feather, Madeline heads upwards. The music swells as Madeline continues higher and higher, and the two meet face to face floating above the mountain. Madeline tries to calmly explain that part of her is everything she needs to let go of, everything she needs to forget about, everything she needs to abandon.
And in response, Madeline throws herself off the mountain.
In an instant, she loses all of her progress. Not only has she fallen off the mountain, but she's sunk even deeper than she started. There's no dialogue, no indicator of where to go, nothing. Nonetheless, Madeline presses on, still keeping in mind the hope Theo gave her, the feather. Eventually, Madeline runs into the person she least wanted to see, Granny. Once again, she toys with Madeline to get on her nerves and put her emotions front and center. And Madeline retorts with her usual sarcasm. But it's more desperate now, more passionate. It's obvious Madeline wants something to change that hasn't changed yet. In response, Granny suggests she just talk to part of her and try to understand how she feels.
And it's at this moment that Madeline finally decides to stop running.
The tone changes as Madeline continues forward. She chases after the lingering presence of part of her as the music swells up. She pushes forward with renewed intent, hoping to make amends. And at last, she reveals herself again.
This section is the climax of Celeste. I cannot properly put into words how this chapter makes me feel. The immediate rush, the sudden danger, the instant feeling of, oh god, this is it.
The music is intense, the visuals are captivating, the way you bounce off part of her within the midst of platforming. It's the strongest fight I've ever seen in a platformer by far. To this day, every time I replay this fight, the same feeling comes back to me. I feel a rush unlike anything I've ever felt before. I feel challenged, I feel in danger, and yet I feel confident.
This chapter makes you feel Madeline's confidence in perhaps a stronger form than any emotion presented in the game thus far. And what is this confidence? Well, it's the confidence to confront yourself.
It's a difficult confidence to take hold of, but once it's all over, your confidence pays off.
At last, Madeline and part of her understand each other. They know where each other are coming from, and they decide to push forward together. And thus, their powers from the mountain combine.
The two finally make their way out of the pit and meet back up with Granny. At last, Madeline is thankful to her, and Granny is happy to see the two of them no longer fighting. Theo manages to meet Madeline as well and makes some fun comments about part of her in a way only Theo could do.
God, I love Theo. Even though Madeline has now reconciled with herself and she's finally found some direction in her life, we're still not done. After all, we've still got a mountain to climb.
During this chapter, we're shown extensively what Madeline is capable of following her resolution with part of her. There's the obvious twice as many dashes, which is incredibly fun to utilize on its own, but there's also the added bonus of part of her throwing Madeline into the air. I love this mechanic so much because it literally puts a positive spin on the two bouncing off each other in the previous chapter. More than anything else, I feel like this ability shows how far they both come.
Also, do you remember what I said about Chapter 1? How it felt fun and gamey with its light-hearted music and simple platforming? Well, Chapter 7 captures that exact same feeling, only this time, you have the context of everything you've gone through in the back of your mind.
It feels just as fun, yet at the same time, it feels so much more worthwhile. You feel the hype building as you finish one segment and watch the number of meters shoot up. You feel the healing Madeline has gone through as she talks with part of her between every segment. It all culminates into one massive victory lap of revisiting old areas and flying through them with your double dashes. This isn't to say Chapter 7 is easy by any means, not in the slightest. If anything, it forces you to face platforming far more complex and challenging than anything the game has thrown at you before. But the confidence you've gained from confronting yourself fills you with seemingly endless determination to continue.
Technically, Madeline has already found what she came to the mountain for. She's resolved a conflict with part of herself, and she's found the strength to keep going. This climb is all about proving to herself that she's capable.
After everything that's happened, she wants to prove to herself that despite being nervous and facing a massive challenge, she can do this. As the final stretch approaches, checkpoints become small countdowns signifying how close the summit is. Even the mountain itself seems to be on your side as drafts of winds rush from below to give you a boost. This is it. The summit is in sight. Just a little while longer until there's nothing left to climb. The two keep climbing, dashing past spikes and lifting each other up. And finally,
So yeah, that was Celeste, the game that single-handedly made me care about 2D platformers.
I love this story so much. I love the characters, I love the setting, I love the dialogue, I love the way it portrays mental illnesses, and above all, I love the way Celeste incorporates these ideas into gameplay. The story of climbing a mountain to find solitude and get away from the struggles of life is nothing new. Heck, I could just go do that in Breath of the Wild if I felt like it. What sets Celeste apart is the way it interweaves two core ideas: challenge and comfort. Celeste wants you to feel comforted and encouraged from the very beginning. It wants to ease you into the challenges that lie ahead. It's only after the player feels largely at ease that the true terrors begin.
This game tackles heavy themes, that should go without saying, and the design is put together in such a way that even people who don't struggle with what Madeline struggles with can feel those feelings.
Celeste is a hard platformer, and you will fail over and over and over again. You will more than once start to doubt yourself, wonder if you can handle going forward, but the game reminds you, be proud of your death count. You can do this.
By engaging in Celeste's philosophy, playing the game can become strangely therapeutic.
Every chapter you clear is a personal accomplishment that shows how much you've grown. Every milestone pushes you forward, making you feel a certain confidence in yourself that you may have never felt before. Even after reaching the summit, Celeste still provides plenty of opportunities for the player themselves to keep getting better. There are two collectibles hidden deep within every chapter: blue hearts and B-side cassettes. Blue hearts are normally hidden behind abstract puzzles that test your understanding of Celeste's physics, and occasionally even reference older games. B-side cassettes lie at the end of rooms containing blocks that switch to the beat of a song. Collecting these will unlock the B-side of that chapter, a remixed version of the chapter in both gameplay and in music, as each B-side remix is composed by an incredible independent artist. My favorite remix has to be a tie between In Love with a Ghost's Golden Ridge and Too Mellow's Mirror Temple. However, these remix levels are far more than rearranged elements from that chapter. They are substantially more difficult.
To give you an idea of the difficulty progression, Chapter 1 B-side is about 2 steps above Summit.
If you can manage the skill to make it to the end of a B-side, you're rewarded with a red heart for your troubles. So, what's the deal with these hearts? Well, they tie into the 8th chapter of Celeste, The Heart of the Mountain, as well as the 9th downloadable chapter, Farewell.
I'm not going to go into these chapters with too much depth, as they mainly serve as an epilogue to Madeline's story after reaching the summit. But you have my guarantee that these will tickle that where are they now itch you may have from some of these characters.
And of course, they will satisfy your itch for being challenged if my death count is an indication of anything.
Actually, I lied. There is one specific point in Chapter 9 I'd like to bring up.
Without spoiling the entirety of the chapter, I wanted to share this short scene at the end of Chapter 9. There's a short cutscene which shows Madeline waking up in her room. She feels lonely and starts voice chatting with Theo for a bit. It's a really heartwarming scene.
But, wait a minute. Did you see that? Now, I know a lot of people online have been quick to call this queerbaiting.
Queerbaiting, a marketing technique for fiction and entertainment in which creators hint at but then do not actually depict same-sex romance or other forms of LGBTQ representation.
But really? On one hand, I highly doubt the team behind Celeste would intentionally queerbait, as they've shown incredible support for the LGBTQ+ community. On the other hand,
This is the best method of revealing a character to be trans I've ever seen in a video game. Let me explain.
most trans people don't outright tell you they're trans without some previously established trust. You're not going to find yourself talking to a stranger and hear them respond like, "Why yes, I am in fact not identifying with the gender I was assigned at birth. How kind you are for noticing."
There wasn't really a reason for Madeline to bring up something like this about herself in the base story. She's clearly past the point of a physical transition, and it's not her focus in coming to the mountain. However, I still think this detail is important to Celeste's overall story, and it all comes back to part of her.
Let me ask you a question. What part of Madeline is she?
Well, the easy answer is that she represents Madeline's depression and anxiety. Her presence is always somewhere apparent when Madeline starts to panic and feel hopeless. Part of Madeline's role in the story is to give a character to Madeline's mental illnesses and force her to deal with them head-on. But I'd argue it goes a bit deeper. Part of her is written in such a way that the player is able to assign their own mental struggles to her.
This can be anything from depression and anxiety to, in my case, gender dysphoria. Seeing evidence that Madeline once experienced the same feelings I did when playing Celeste for the first time made me feel incredibly validated, and gave me the confidence to pursue the person I wanted to become.
When talking about mental struggles in anything from popular media to speaking with parental figures, you might often encounter rhetoric that goes a bit like, "Just ignore it, leave it behind, overcome it. It's just making you struggle, so find the strength to make it stop bullying you." This is the mindset Madeline has when she first begins to climb the mountain, but Celeste hears that rhetoric and holds up a big fat "no you."
Instead, it argues that you should listen to your anxiety, your depression, or even your dysphoria. Listen to what it tells you and recognize the role it plays in your life. It's not out to harm you, it just wants to talk with you, just like how you would want someone to talk with yourself. After all, it's a part of you, and you wouldn't quite be you without it.
There is one thing I want to say though. If Celeste has helped you come to terms with mental illness, I just want to say that you deserve credit for that. That change came from inside of you, and you're capable of a lot more. Thank you.
And thus, their powers from the mountain combine, giving Madeline a second dash. That sounds infomercial.
A second dash.
Oh god! Oh my word.
Are you tired of only having one dash?
Confront yourself and get a second dash.
Confront your darker evil self and combine forces and get a second dash.
Oh my god.